Okay, Wildcats. Today we're looking at Tuesday, February 20th, attributes of rational functions on page 57. If you would, update your table of contents. All right, now your table of contents are updated. We're going to move on to the examples because there's no notes today. All right, so attributes of rational functions. We're going to find the zeros, vertical asymptotes, horizontal asymptotes, and holes. Okay, so the first thing you want to do before you do any of the problem is you want to factor the numerator and denominator. Okay, so we can factor out a 4 here. This becomes 4 times x minus 3. That was a bell. Divided by x minus 1. Now, if there's a hole, these would divide and become 1. Since they don't, there are no holes. Okay, now for the zeros, you set the numerator equal to 0. So 4x minus 12 equal to 0. Okay, so we add 12 to both sides, divide by 4, x equals 3. Okay, now for the vertical asymptote, you set the denominator equal to 0. That's another bell. Now, the bell just reminded me that for zeros, you actually need to write it as a point. So 3, 0. Okay, and the reason that's important is because when you solve the vertical asymptote, you get x equals 1. That's a vertical line at x equals 1. So this is a vertical line. That's a point. Okay. All right, so now the horizontal asymptote or slant asymptote, you do this. You do now you divide, and just some kind of reminders. This is the dividend. This is the divisor. And this is the quotient. Now, while that's important is because when you do this, when you divide the dividend by the divisor, the horizontal slant asymptote is going to be your quotient, okay? So you ask yourself, well, what do you multiply x by to give you 4x? So the answer is 4. Okay? Now, the quotient's done. You don't need to go any further because you don't need the remainder. So you have a horizontal asymptote at y equals 4. Now, if it's just a constant, it's a horizontal asymptote. If you have an x, then it's going to be a slant asymptote. All right, let's look at example 2. Okay, so again, you want to factor the numerator and denominator. There's nothing you can do here for the numerator. Here, do 2 parentheses. Now, what's unique about this is you want to rewrite this as x squared plus 0x minus 4. Okay? So you want to find all the factors of negative 4. So 1 times negative 4, 2 times negative 2. And then you want to know which combination makes 0. What's that? So the factors are x plus 2, x minus 2. All right. So since nothing divides and becomes 1, there's no holes. Okay. So for the zeros, you set the numerator equal to 0. So 2x equals 0. So divide by 2, x equals 0. Now remember, you want to actually write that as a point, 0, 0. And it's the y value 0 because if it's a 0, it's an x-intercept, and x-intercepts the y's are 0. Okay, so now the vertical asymptote, you set the denominator equal to 0, so you set x plus 2 equal to 0, and x minus 2 equal to 0. So here you have x equals negative 2 and x equals 2. And you want to make sure you write that as a point because this is a point, and these are actual vertical lines, vertical dashed lines at x equals negative 2 and x equals 2. All right. So for the horizontal slant asymptote, we have x squared minus 4. Now, you don't just want to write 2x because you have to account for the x squared. So you actually want to write this as 0x squared plus 2x. Okay? So you're going to divide the dividend by the divisor. So you ask yourself, well, what do you multiply x squared to give you 0x squared? The answer is 0. And since you have the quotient, you don't need to go any further. So you have a horizontal asymptote at y equals 0. All right, so now let's take a look at example 3. All right, so again, you want to factor the numerator and denominator. So 2 parentheses. Now you ask yourself, well, multiplies to give you negative 6 and combines to be 1. So let's look at all the factors. So 1 times negative 6, 2 times negative 3, and 3 times negative 2. So this combination works. It gives you negative 6, and 3 minus 2 is 1. So your factors are x plus 3, x minus 2, divided by x minus 2. Now, in this case, x minus 2 divided by x minus 2 is 1. So thus, you're going to have a whole. So you said x minus 2 equal to 0. And solve. So x equals 2 is where your whole. Now, you actually have to find the point. So you're going to substitute 2 into the equation. So that's f of 2 equals 2 squared plus 2 minus 6 divided by, oh, hold on, I almost made a mistake. And I realized something, if I do 2 minus 2, it's 0, so it doesn't work. So when you plug the 2 in, you have to ignore the whole. So this becomes 1, so you just plug it in here to the x plus 3. So that's 2 plus 3 equals 5. So you have a whole at 2 comma 5. Okay. All right. So now for the zeros, you set the numerator equal to 0. So x plus 3 equals 0. Now here's you have to be careful. There's a hole here, so you're not going to have an intercepted x here. So you only set x plus 3 equal to 0. So your 0 is x equals negative 3. And remember that's the point negative 3, 0. Because if it's a 0, it's an x-intercept, and x-intercepts, the y values are always 0. Okay, so for the vertical asymptote, you set, now here you have to be careful. Since this became 1, there's no denominator, so since you don't have a denominator, there's nothing to set equal to 0, so there's no vertical asymptote. Okay, now for the slant asymptote, same thing. Since there's no denominator, you can't divide, so there's no horizontal asymptote or slant asymptote. All right, example 4. So again, you want to factor the numerator and denominator, so that's parentheses, parentheses. And again, you want to find all the combinations of 12. So 1 times 12, 2 times 6, 3 times 4. Well, you see that 3 times 4 gives you 12, and they combine to be 7. So it's x plus 3, x plus 4, divided by x minus 1. Now, nothing divides and becomes 1, so there's no holes. Now for the zeros, you set x plus 3 equal to 0 and x plus 4 equal to 0. So you get x equals negative 3. So you have a point at negative 3 comma 0. and you subtract 4 from both sides, you get x equals -4. So you have a point at -4, 0. All right, so for the vertical asymptote, you set the denominator equal to 0, so x minus 1 equal to 0. So you have a vertical asymptote at x equals 1. And then for the horizontal slant asymptote, you have x minus 1 divided by x squared plus 7x plus 12. And so then you have to think about, well, what do you multiply x by to give you x squared? Well, that's 1x. Now you actually have to go through, so 1x times x is 1x squared. 1x times -1 is a -1x. Now when you're doing division, you actually subtract, which you subtract a negative becomes positive. This becomes 0, that becomes 8x. So what do you multiply x by to give you 8? So plus 8. Since you have an x, it's a slant asymptote at y equals 1x plus 8. All right, at this point, you have two options. If you understood all examples, start working on assignment. If not, the other option is you can wait till class, and I'll go over these examples again in class. Either way, have a wonderful Wildcat day.